Okay, my name is Bill Cohen, and my journey, again, is one of resistance. It starts in Washington, D.C., and winds up in Boulder, but then expands out to the former Soviet Union, particularly St. Petersburg and Moscow in Russia, Dushanbe in Tajikistan. In Boulder, I continued to be connected in one way or another with the Vietnam War. I ran the Legal Aid and Defender program at the law school, which was myself and 3 lawyers, 2 faculty members, and 100 student lawyers. And we represented a lot of people who were either seeking to avoid selective service and go to Vietnam, or participated in a major demonstration that took place here after Nixon bombed Cambodia. And there was really a police riot that wound up arresting several hundred people, and we represented almost all of those people and got them all their cases dismissed. In the meantime, I also led a peaceful march against the war in Vietnam in Boulder. And sometime later in the 80s, I became interested in the plight of Soviet Jews in the former Soviet Union. Primarily 2 kinds of people at that time: political prisoners who were being arrested for their protest of the Soviet Union, and refuseniks, who were people who were had applied to leave the Soviet Union, had been turned down or refused, which is why they were called refuseniks, and then suffered persecution because of that. They lost their jobs, some went to prison. They were fairly well ostracized by the society and struggled to get on. They were under constant surveillance by the KGB. And ultimately, we started an organization in Boulder because of 2 reasons. One, Olga Plum and Misha Plum, who I think you interviewed, came to Boulder. And Olga's father was a famous refusenik, Niall Maiman, who was one of the Helsinki monitors who was being highly persecuted by the Soviets. And we took up his cause. And then Boulder formed a sister city relationship with Dushanbe, the capital of Tajikistan. And we did some research and turned up there were about 100 refuseniks in Dushanbe and about 20,000 Jews. Most of us had never heard of the place, let alone knew that there was this long history of Jews being present. So we started an organization called Boulder Action for Soviet Jewry, and we advocated for Maiman and for the Dushanbe refuseniks, all of whom ultimately, due in part to our pressure and pressure we brought through our congressmen and our senators and the White House and the State Department, received permission and left for either the United States or Israel. I then formed a public interest law firm called the Center for Human Rights Advocacy to represent refugees who had applied to come to the United States as refugees, but who had been refused refugee status by the U.S. government, or who were in the process of getting it and had various problems. And I created a public interest law firm. We actually represented these people before the U.S. Immigration Service in Moscow, and with a high degree of success. And we wound up bringing a number of families from Dushanbe, our sister city, to Boulder, many of whom are still here. And Boulder absorbed and resettled about 250 Soviet Jews, which for its size of a community is unprecedented. One of the other things that we were invited to do was, after the Soviet Union broke up and Russia looked like it was going to become a democratic society, one of the representatives in the St. Petersburg City Council, who had been fighting for human rights all his life, invited me to put on seminars for Russian lawyers, judges, prosecutors, investigators, and defense lawyers, which I organized and got grants to do. Part of the first 2 seminars dealt with pretrial release, and it allowed me to use the leverage of the seminar to actually get into what they call isolators. They're local prisons where the conditions are nothing short of torture, where people who are arrested but not yet convicted are placed in cells built for one person with 30 or 40 or 50 people. And it's just hell. The only thing I could compare it to is pictures I've seen of Auschwitz and concentration camps. And they're really being tortured. They're being deprived of many, many basic fundamental rights. And the idea to isolate them, to prevent them from getting contact with their families, to receiving packages, and to force them to confess. And we actually saw this in the flesh. I was in them. The only way they can communicate is by shooting little darts out the window to their wives who are standing outside the prison, shouting and screaming at them. And we witnessed that and actually recorded it. And then we demonstrated how to run a pretrial release program under their new constitution. And we actually filmed some actual hearings in the prison, and a few people were released. But the conditions remain for the most part.
Thank you.